Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Dr. Paul Ekman, who's Professor Emeritus at University of California, San Francisco. He is the world's deception detection expert, co-discoverer of microexpressions, and the inspiration behind the television series Lie to Me. He's a pioneer in the study of emotions and their relation to facial expressions, and he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. And he's also ranked 15th among the most influential psychologists of the 21st century. Wow, that's quite a bio you have, Dr. Ekman. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Well, you know I'm excited to talk to you because this is right up the alley of things that I'm interested in. And I know I gave a bit of a background, but can you tell a little bit more of how you got interested in psychology? Who most influenced you to get to where you are?
Well, I'm just trying to decide which of the various answers I could give you I should provide. It was largely ignored when I was in college and graduate school. So that was one of the reasons, because it meant that there was an opportunity to be a pioneer, and I wouldn't be saddled with having to read a lot of past work, since there wasn't a lot of past work.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I've always been visually oriented. I entertained and had an early career as a photographer and photographing people's faces, and that, of course, led directly into what I did in my science. Although, once you do science with a camera, the camera part becomes very dull because it just becomes a fixed recorder and not something that you use creatively.
Well, you did some work. I know you were talking about how you can either verify what other people have done or start out and look for brand new research. And I understand that that would be so much more fascinating. I was looking at your background. I saw that you say you got kicked out of high school, but then you ended up with this high level of achievement. So I find that fascinating. How did you manage to get kicked out of high school?
It was when I asked my teacher in, I think it was either 9th or 10th grade, what novels are we going to read this year? And she announced them, and I said, well, I know Faulkner or Hemingway. And she said, because I'm the teacher. And I said, well, why did we just finish fighting a war against Hitler to have a dictator in the homeroom?
Oh. That didn't go over well. That'd do it. That
got me right out of high school.
Well, I like that you were curious, though, that you had that natural sense of wanting to learn something. What did you end up writing your dissertation topic on?
Well, capital punishment, actually. And I did my dissertation from beginning to end, including the write-up, in 3 weeks, because my research advisor I was already interested in expression, and he said, it's going to take you years to figure out how to deal with expression. Why don't you just do a dissertation on something easy that you can get out of the way? It's just a hoop you have to jump through. And he suggested a topic, and that's what I did. I never published my dissertation. It's not something I'm ever proud of, but it got me the degree, and that was the purpose.
You know, this is really interesting to me because you talk about and write about so many things that have become very famous due to the television show Lie to Me and other areas of your research. I was looking at the list of references on your page. I mean, for 50 years of research is super impressive. And You're known for saying we have these universal expressions, and I want to talk about them because a lot of people might have seen the show Lie to Me or have heard of your work through other means, of course. But what are these universal expressions? How did you determine what they were? First of all, that's kind of interesting. I don't know the
Well, when I started in this research, the dominant view is that of Margaret Mead, who became a real antagonist of mine, that expressions varied from one culture to another. Now, that was strictly conjecture on her part, because Margaret never really worked in different cultures. She wrote about them, she visited them, but she never lived for even 2 months in another culture. And by a series of accidents, got funded to do overseas research. The only tag on the funding was that I couldn't subcontract it. I had to do it myself, and at least half of my time had to be spent out of the country. So I traveled and worked in 18 countries around the world and found I didn't care what I would find, whether it would be that expressions differed or that they were the same. I just wanted to settle the question one way or the other, and what I found was that they were the same. And that was, at that time, a very unpopular view. The popular view is that anything important varied from culture to culture. The biological basis of social behavior was not only totally ignored, it was thought to be sort of Nazi sympathetic. And of course, the Nazis had preached a line that biology is important, but they preached a line that only the biology of a preferred race, that one race was superior to another. I was finding everyone is the same. It was basically a challenge to the Nazi viewpoint.
Well, so I had read, which was interesting to me because my father was born legally blind, that even blind people have these same expressions. I watched.
Oh, sure, because you don't learn them by seeing them. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens with blind people is because they get no visual feedback, is they develop often some strange facial mannerisms. But if they're angry or they're afraid or they're sad, you see the same expressions on their face. That was one of the crucial studies that I can now no longer remember whether I did it or I simply read the studies of others and wrote about it. But it certainly was one of the very important sources.
I think when I was watching that they would put blind people in front of people having certain expressions and they would react even if they couldn't see them. They had a sense of something, which I found interesting. The whole perception idea of how we perceive other people,
yes.
How did you find that varied by all the 18 countries I think you said you lived in? Was there a different way that do people perceive each other in different ways based on their culture? Is this something that's biological? I think it's just a fascinating study.
Well, it's your attitude about what you see that varies, that you learn in the course of growing up. You also learn about what expressions you're not supposed to show. Wipe that expression off your face. Don't look like that at your mother. In every culture, we teach our children to censor certain expressions in particular situations. And it's usually expressions that are that adults don't want to see or regard as rebellious, that are censored. And sometimes people will learn to inhibit expressions to such extent that it becomes a habit that they can no longer choose not to do. And that doesn't occur usually, but it can occur sometimes for some people.
Now, is this what you taught at University of California? Was this the course on this, or what did you teach there?
I taught almost nothing there because I got at that earlier in my life. Well, it wasn't that much earlier. It was up until there was a program at the National Institute of Health to rescue scientists from administration and teaching. And it was a 5-year award called a Career Award that bought your contract from the university so you could do full-time research and you couldn't be asked to serve on committees or to teach anything other than your own work. And it was competitive nationally, and I got it renewed 7 times. So for 35 years, whenever I got asked to sit on a committee, I'd say, honored as I am by this request, the terms of my award do not allow me to accept it. So I never served on committees, and I did full-time research because of having this career award.
Well,
35 years is a long time. It's
yeah.
a good piece of a career, particularly the early period. I had it from around, let's see, from about 28 for the next 35 years. It was most of my formal research career. I had this career award that freed me from committee assignments and from teaching anything but my own findings.
Well, you'd researched some interesting stuff during that time, and I was looking at you've researched why patients who claimed they were not depressed later committed suicide. You've done training workshops for TSA, CIA, FBI. What's the most interesting thing you've done in your opinion? I mean, what excited you the most?
That's a very hard question to answer because I didn't do anything that didn't excite me. If it didn't excite me, why bother doing it?
Good point.
And I had the freedom because of this career award, because it kept getting renewed. And after I'd had it renewed 3 or 4 times, and now had it for 20 years, I knew that they had a vested interest in me, that they wanted to be able to show that that is, the government wanted to show that what they were investing in had paid off. So it wasn't that I got lazy, but I knew that I could do increasingly outrageous work and still get it renewed. And and that's what I chose to do. I wanted to do things that would make people surprised. I've always thought there are 2 kinds of research. There's confirmation research, where you're setting out to prove something that you're pretty certain is true, and there's discovery research, where you don't know what's true and you're trying to find out. And it's discovery research that's the riskiest, but it's what I have done most of.
Yeah, that would be the much more interesting of the 2 for me. And I understand that you've come up with so much that no one else had even touched on. And I'm wondering how you got the attention of some people, like Dalai Lama had you work on secular training programs. You've done so many different areas. What was that like to work with that group?
Well, that was really because of my daughter, who had attended a workshop with the Dalai Lama that he ran for high school students when she was a high school student. And I got invited to Dharamsala, India, to be part of a 5-person group to meet with him for a week. And I would have turned it down. It seemed to me like a lot of effort, except you got to bring a silent observer. And I thought this would be a real kick for my daughter. So I accepted it. And for reasons I can't explain, the Dalai Lama has an explanation for it that I don't completely accept. We just hit it off as if we'd known each other all our lives. And he believes that in past incarnations, we were brothers. Now, of course, I don't believe in reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very amused by the fact that he can explain it and I can't.
He seems like he would be so fascinating. I would love to talk to him.
Yeah, he's has a very playful mind, and I've spent more time in one-on-one conversation with him than with anyone else in the world.
Wow.
And we spent about 50 hours, not all at once, but over time, in one-on-one, very intense, very playful conversations, trying to see where it would lead, often changing sides. We would each argue one side and then switch and argue the other side, just because we weren't involved personally in what the outcome was. We were just intrigued by seeing if we could come up with an answer to something that there wasn't an answer for up until then.
I love that. That would be so helpful for people to develop empathy if more people could do that, to actually look at more than one side of the equation, don't you think?
Yes, well, I've used that as an exercise in when I've taught that you have to, when two people disagree, they each have to present the other person's point of view to them in a way that they say, well, you've got it completely correct. And it usually takes someone 4 or 5 attempts to get it. But then you can be certain that they completely understand the view of the other person. It's something that I learned from the Quakers, who've used that to deal with disagreement for a long time. It's a very useful exercise for what I call respectful disagreement.
That's almost like paraphrasing in a way. You know how students love to copy and paste and cite that direct quotes in class, and I often have my students make them paraphrase to even just demonstrate that they've digested the information. Do you think that that's helpful for listening? So did you find that it's a good listening exercise when you have to figure out how to put this in someone else's perspective, I imagine?
Oh, yes. And, of course, you don't get it all at once. So you have to do it in successive approximations.
Well, as we talk about your universal expressions, I think we should probably list how many they are and what they are for those who aren't familiar. Could you just find what you found were the expressions?
Yes. Let's see. Well, anger and fear and enjoyment. Here, fear, enjoyment. Disgust. Surprise. And anguish, which has 2 sides to it, anguish and sadness. Mm-hmm. So it's one emotion, but it has 2 facets, if you like.
And
is that 7?
I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, we got them all.
That's it. I wish there were more, but there aren't. Now,
that's interesting.
At least 5 of those you can see in other primates, so they're not unique to humans.
And which ones are those?
Anger, fear, anguish.
So anger, fear, anguish,
enjoyment.
Do they have disgust and surprise as well in primates?
Well, it's not. Disgust and surprise are not as certain.
That's interesting.
I think so, but the evidence isn't as good.
So, you were more interested in facial expressions than body movements and hand gestures, right? So
Yes. Well, no, I started out with body movement and hand gestures,
mm-hmm.
but it was both my contact with Sylvan Tompkins, who showed me the amount of extraordinary information he could get from someone's face, that convinced me to look at the face. I mean, I knew the face was important, but it seemed like it would be impossible to be able to get an objective system for measuring it. And it took me, and my coworker, Wally Friesen, it took the two of us 6 or 7 years to develop a systematic, reliable tool for measuring facial movement. Face is very complicated, and the typical facial expression involves 2 to 4 movements, contractions of muscles simultaneously. We studied up to 6. It's very rare to see 6, but not rare to see 4 movements appear on the face at the same instant in time. It's our most complex signal system, but it serves another purpose. It's also our identity system. Many other primates rely on smell to identify one member from another. We don't. In fact, we do what we can to disguise smell, and we rely on the appearance of the face and tell one person from another. And that's interesting also because you can tell kinship from the face. People who come from the same region where there's been a lot of intermarriage, they look a little more alike. You can say, you look like you're from the northern part of Norway. And indeed they are, because they have that particular Norwegian look or that Sicilian look on their face. So it tells a little bit about kinship, but it's primarily an identity signal system, who you are, one from another, and an emotion signal system. And of course, you cannot speak, but unless you put on a mask, your face reveals how you feel.
That's interesting. First of all, I'm half Sicilian, so I'm curious what a Sicilian look is.
Well, it's not something I can easily describe in words.
Well, I'll bet. Yeah. But, I'm fascinated by just how this all works in terms of how we can help it, use it for good reasons. And I've read how you were worried that it would be used for bad uses, potentially, maybe with juries and maybe coming up with inconclusive, opinions on things. And I also saw that you had not initially wanted to be behind the show Lie to Me, and they had to work a little bit to get you into that. So do you want to talk about the potential negative uses first, and then we'll go into some what we could hope it be used for?
Well, the thing that really worried me about Lie to Me is that by watching a program like that, people would think they could tell with a lot of confidence whether someone is being truthful or not. And they would then misjudge somebody in a situation where they were sitting on a jury. If someone is deliberately trying to mislead you, it's no simple matter to be able to discern it. It takes us about 30 hours to train people to do a lot better than chance. So it's not easy to detect whether someone is trying to mislead you about how they feel. It's possible. We can get most people up to about 90% accuracy in making that judgment, but that still means they're not able to do so for 10% of the people. So it's not an easy skill to acquire, and it never gets perfect.
Well, I'm thinking.
And there are some people that are, I called them at one point natural liars. I don't know what to call them. There's some people you just can't tell. And
sociopaths?
Well, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Sociopaths, or where do they fall in?
No, not at all.
Uh-huh.
Actually, it turns out that sociopaths and psychopaths are rather poor liars.
Ah.
We believe them because they're so attractive as
Charismatic.
people, not because they're great liars. They lie, of course, quite often without much regret about it. That's what distinguishes them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not very good at it. We find it very easy to spot them. But there are, about 5 to 8% of a random sample of people will turn out to be extremely adept at concealing how they feel and misleading you about that. And they tend to go into professions that capitalize on it, but into particular sales. Really great salesmen are, in our research, turn out to be capable. I'm not saying that they do lie more often than others, but that when they do, it's hard to catch them.
Well, that's interesting. I've been in sales for decades, but I think that I know what you're saying, and I think that there's so much that we want to know, and some things we don't want to know, and I want to get into that. But I was wondering how much I thought I saw that age and wrinkles and certain things can affect how well we can tell, and also my husband's a plastic surgeon, so I imagine that Botox and some of that has to have some impact, right?
Yes, well, the problem, though, with Botox is that it inhibits all expression, and people who've had Botox are less appealing to others because we are attracted to expressive faces.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's a nice trade-off. With Botox, you don't age as much, and we're more attractive to younger-looking faces, but you're not appealing as much because we're more attracted to expressive faces.
That's
so,
interesting.
Which do you want? Do you want to be unexpressive but young-looking, or expressive but look your age? You got to make a choice. You can't get both.
That's an interesting thing. So, but as we age, the wrinkles kind of hide whether you're able to determine if we're lying, though, right?
Well, it just means you need to take account of them.
I see.
You don't. Permanent wrinkles will largely disappear when the facial muscles contract.
Well, I was looking at the Lie to Me show. I remember I was really into that when it was out, and I thought it was a really interesting, so unique look at all this. And I like Tim Roth. I think he's really a good actor. He's basically takes apart different expressions throughout the show and says, what it means. And I think they threw some pictures up on the screen. They'd show some politicians and all that. And I saw you say you don't make any comments about people running for office, but they're fair game afterwards, right? So can you give us some examples that when you could tell someone was lying?
Let's see.
I think I saw you say about Clinton with not having sex with that woman was one, and
oh yeah, that was a really easy one because he used distancing language for talking about someone who he was very close to.
Mm-hmm.
We knew he was very close to her. Being very close to someone doesn't mean you're having sexual relations with them, but that was indeed the case. A particularly odd form of sexual relations, but Clinton was such an attractive person, as a person, so appealing that we wanted to believe him because we liked him so much. There are some people whose manner is so likable that they can the expression is get away with murder. Now, they can't get away with murder itself, but they can get away with an awful lot because we want to believe them because they're so likable. And there are some people who have the disadvantage of being so unlikable that we disbelieve them even when they're being truthful.
Well, that's very challenging in the business world. If we have to deal with so many different personalities. Do you deal with talking to people about how they can get along better in the workplace based on reading faces and dealing with what we think we don't like because it's different than our culture?
I haven't done that at all for two reasons. One is I'm not in the business world myself, so I don't have a lot of experience to draw upon. And the second reason is I've chosen to spend my time dealing with law enforcement and national security personnel rather than people in the business world. I don't have time to do everything and also do my own research. So I thought that it was, since everything I've learned has been at the public expense, that is, it's been all funded by NIH or NSF, I thought I should apply it not to help a particular business, but to help public agencies. And the agencies that I've chosen, I've worked with all the three-letter agencies in the federal government.
Well, there's some lies. I mean, you say that there's some lies that there's honorable reasons for lying, but do we want to know all the reasons that people lie? I mean, if your wife, I'm sure it's got to be challenging to be married to somebody who can tell every time you're lying. So was that a challenge for people because they're assuming you can tell everything that they're thinking?
Well, I always try to convince them that it's not true. I say, for one thing, thoughts have no signal other than the fact I can tell you're thinking, but I can't tell what you're thinking about. It's only emotions that have a signal. So I can tell how you're feeling, but I can't tell what triggered the feeling. Emotions don't reveal their trigger. And so in that sense, you're pretty safe.
So we have to ask questions to find out the trigger then.
That's right. And I may not answer it truthfully. And
then you'll know they're lying if that's the case. But we'll never get back to the end of what the initial problem is unless we have good communication, I guess, right?
Correct.
So I guess what do you feel that spotting microexpressions does for us as just day in and day out life? Why would we want to go to? You've done these seminars for to teach all this. Is your daughter's name Dr. Ekman, right?
Yep.
And you guys do training or have done cultivating emotional balance and all these different kinds of things that you've worked on in the past. Who would most benefit from going through that?
Well, the cultivating emotional balance that we've taught was really developed to help people better understand their own emotions and the emotions of others. There's very little focus on being able to spot concealed emotions.
I see.
Now, we do have a course for that, but I only have offered it myself to and my daughter to law enforcement and national security. I haven't offered it in the corporate world. Now, there are people who have studied my work who do. I don't know whether they do a good job or a bad job, but I myself don't do it. It's not because I'm antagonistic, but I have a limit on where I want to spend my time and how much time I have, particularly as I get older. So I've chosen to spend it in a way that I think will have the most public benefit.
So what are you working on right now?
Not much.
That sounded like a nice breath, like yes, no. Well,
Pardon me. I'm working on trying to take the research that I did in New Guinea, and get that published in some publishable form, because you can't do that there aren't any cultures left in the world anymore that haven't been touched by the media.
right.
And so I've got quite a lot of information and photographs and film on this culture when it was visually isolated. And so I'm trying to find a place that would want to publish it. So far, I haven't had any success.
No, that's
But it's
amazing.
both text and film, and I think would be interesting to most people to see. But so far, I haven't been able to find anybody who wants to publish it.
Well, when you were there, how did you? What kind of accommodations? Actually, I don't know how to put it. Where did you sleep, and how did you stay there?
With difficulty.
I'll bet.
Now, I was enormously interesting to these people. I mean, showing them a flashlight. I mean, these are people who were still using stone implements. They were using stone axes. They had no metal of any kind. And so any of my gadgets were amazing to them. And so they built me a grass house. And that's what I lived. The nice thing about a grass house is if 3 or 4 people work on it, you can build it in a couple of hours. And so wherever you go, they can build you a grass house. And that's what I would sleep in.
Now,
And
how long were you there?
2 to 3 months, 2 years in a row.
Wow. Now, were you married, that you had a family at home while this was going on, and you just would...
No, I was single.
Oh, that would make it easier.
much easier.
Uh-huh.
And eventually you would get to the point where you would feel like, I want somebody you can really talk to, and you want some intimate contact, which that really wasn't possible there. And when that got strong enough, then I'd go home, come back another time.
So what was the language there? Would they speak English? I mean, out...
Oh, no.
Uh-huh.
There was 1 or 2 boys who had been to a missionary school, and they had learned Pidgin. And Pidgin is a lingua franca. It's spoken throughout Southeast Asia. It's made up, and it's not a written language.
Right.
And I had learned some Pidgin. So I would go from English to Pidgin, and they would go from Pidgin to their own language. So I had 2 young adolescent boys who were my translators.
Well, that had to be a really fascinating time for you, and it's got to be very hard to get that kind of research. I mean, that takes real dedication. Was there a time where you thought, I can't do this? This is just like, I'm in a grass hut in New Guinea. Or were you thinking, this is just like my dream?
Oh, no. I realized this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that in 10 years, it wouldn't be there anymore. There wouldn't be a culture that hadn't been saturated with television in particular. So I knew this was a rare opportunity, and I was really eager to seize it.
Well, so which of your research do you think got Time Magazine's most attention? I mean, what are you most known for?
I'm most known for the deception research, but I think the most important research I did was on the universality of emotional expression.
Now, did you deal with gestures as well? I was watching one of your talks where you said there's about 80 gestures in the world today, which I find interesting. Um,
I dealt with gestures also, but gestures tend to be, for the most part, not all, but the overwhelming majority of gestures are culture specific and socially learned languages. And so they differ from place to place. That makes them interesting, but also makes them, in some sense, less important.
I think you had said that the most common is the head shake, yes and no. And if you if somebody's lying, sometimes they'll say yes while shaking their head no, and you can.
A little bit, yes. But even that is not universal.
Oh, really?
Yes, and Turkey, it doesn't mean the same. It means just the opposite.
Uh-huh.
So there are no universal gestures, other than some vague hand movements to indicate that you want people to come closer or to stay away. Apart from that, the gestures are socially learned and culturally variable, unlike facial expressions.
Well, so you've dealt with a lot of court-based cases. I saw that you worked on a famous embezzling case that was big before Madoff had become famous. Yeah. Can you tell a little bit about that? I think that's an interesting case.
Well, I tried to get to interview him, and I couldn't get permission.
What was his name?
From his lawyer, Bernie Madoff.
Oh, Madoff as well. Okay, I thought that was two cases. All right, huh?
And they were unwilling to let me talk to him directly, and well,
that would have been interesting.
It really would have been, and I wanted to know in particular how he viewed what had happened to those who had been closest to him, particularly his wife, who suffered quite a lot
when
he got caught. And did he have any regrets about it? But I never got a chance. I was not allowed to talk to him by his attorneys. I don't know why, but they wouldn't approve of it.
Well, now, who was the person who was accused? The people in a bunch of banks he was embezzling, and the banks would have been culpable. And they asked him did you steal the money, and he kind of shake his head no while saying yes. Wasn't there a famous case that you worked on? And I'm trying to look and see if I could look back.
Yes, there was, and I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I can't remember the name. But it's interesting to see what kind of support somebody like you, who's an expert, could lend to a trial. So did you do as much like they did in Lie to Me, where he's the expert and you're on the stand and you're doing all that, or
no,
was that Hollywood?
No, that's Hollywood, because in courtroom, no experts on truthfulness are allowed. The finder of fact must be the jury, and no expert can testify in an American courtroom about who's lying and who's telling the truth. What you at most could do is talk about what are some of the signs to pay attention to that might be helpful. But I have done very little of that. I think it's better for me to stay out of the courtroom and let the process go forward as it does. I've instead spent my time working with police and working with national security. Some of my friends have said to me, "Why are you helping the police?" Because in a city like San Francisco, there's a lot of anti-police sentiment. And I said, "Well, do you want them to make more mistakes? Do you really want them to put more innocent people in jail, let more guilty people go free? I mean, it's obvious. It's in our public interest for them to do a better job. And they want to do a better job. So if I can help them, I will. I just don't want them to rely too much on what I have to say, because I don't have enough evidence that in a criminal situation, I haven't done research on criminal situations, so I think it applies, but I can't be certain. So I'm very cautious. Don't make any claims. Take it for what it's worth. Maybe worth nothing.
I'm wondering if you found that certain cultures care more about truthfulness than others as you've traveled around the world. I mean, are we more focused on it or less focused on it than other countries? Or is it acceptable? And as like almost like salespeople, it's okay, or to be that or not.
I really haven't investigated that, and I think the attitudes are likely to be very similar. That we have different standards for what we expect from people we're intimate with than for strangers or people we deal with in a more professional or business setting.
Mm-hmm.
Their intimacy cannot proceed without trust, and trust cannot occur if you're doubtful about whether you might be being misled. So trust is a pretty sacred, important requirement for intimacy. And you think about, who is it that you really trust? Who is it that you would tell something that you're a bit ashamed about? There aren't many people like that. The difference between what you would like to have publicly known and what you would trust with your best friend, I believe you probably trust your best friend more than your spouse with certain information. But that depends on the kind of relationship you have with your best friend and with your spouse.
That's true. So if we're trying to build trust in a business setting, and I know you said you didn't research business, but I'm trying to extrapolate some of this for people who want to build trust. Do you have any suggestions on what's really worked to build trust?
I would expect exposure.
Mm-hmm.
That is revealing things about yourself.
Being vulnerable, you think, to some extent?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That'll invite reciprocation.
Mm-hmm.
And that will take you towards establishing trust. But, trust is not an easy thing to establish. And with some people, distrust is the default. Now, if you have a lot of distrust, you're a very lonely person. You really can't have a strong... Do you think you could have a strong friendship with someone you don't trust?
Right. So you're guilty until proven innocent, in other words.
Yeah.
Well...
So your closest friends are people that you trust. Your closest friends are people that you could tell things that you're ashamed of. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I hadn't said that. I did, but I hadn't.
Yeah.
Who are you going to say that to?
Right. Well, I think that a lot of this is very fascinating to all groups and all ages. And I know you were consulted for Inside Out, the Disney movie, right? Where they talked about the different characters. How was that experience?
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because I think the guy I worked with is named Pete Docter.
Uh-huh.
And he was a very interesting guy and had a very playful mind, and we had a good time together. And it was entertainment, so you could stretch things a bit and not worry.
Did you get to meet Louis Black? The one that did Anger? He's the actor behind the Anger voice.
I can't remember.
He's a really funny comedian. I was just wondering if you got to meet the people who did the voices behind each of the different
No, I don't think I did.
Oh. Well, I'm just curious if you would do it again. I was watching some of the stuff. A lot of people ask you that, if you could go back, do it again. Are you, was this something that that you think has been useful? And is there any regrets of anything that you found or discovered?
No, not really. I wish I had more time to do more research, to make more discoveries. But in the areas that I worked, I think I pretty much found out what I was trying to find out. And I'd have to start in different research, on different research topics. And too late in my life to do that.
Well, I think that you've done some amazing stuff. I know you're fascinated by the idea from the book Picture of Dorian Gray, and that was one my dad was always telling me as a child. And it's a book that sticks with you, right? If you can tell from somebody's face of what has actually happened, I could see why this has been such a great area of research for you. So is your daughter carrying the torch, or anyone else in your family interested in the same thing?
No. And I have tried very much to not, I would be delighted if they did, but I don't want them to feel any obligation. I want them to pursue what they want to pursue. And my daughter and I have occasionally co-taught about emotion, but she really has a very different set of interests that I respect and I think are very worthwhile. And I think it's important that she have a reputation independent of me, and which she's gained now. In fact, she's become a bit of a guru, and I don't think I'm regarded as a guru, but she has a guru-like following and gives public talks. I try to go in here. They're fun to listen to. She speaks well and interestingly, and she speaks about things that I would never speak about. And not that they're unspeakable, it's just that I don't know anything about them.
Oh, well,
but she's,
you've definitely know a lot about more than most people, and you have just a wealth of research, and I'm sure everybody has if they didn't realize where this research had come from. I mean, it's amazing what you've done to shed the light on something that is so important. And I was really honored that you agreed to be on the show today. Just so fascinated by everything you did, and I really appreciated it. Do you have any websites or anything you'd like to share, or can they just go to your main website? I just was curious how people could reach you.
Well, the website's the best way. It's paulekman.com, so it's easy to find, and there's lots of stuff there that they can download and use and read about. And there's some tools there that are usable, and so that's the best source. And anything new that I come up with, and there isn't too likely that I'm going to come up with much new at this point in my life. But if I did, it would appear on my website. So that's the place to go.
Well, you've done an amazing body of work, and it's been such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Ekman. I really appreciated the conversation.
Well, I like your questions. But when you're asked uninteresting questions, it's really painful. But you've asked good questions, so it's been enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.